Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. What advice do you wish you had received early in your career of data engineering? If you hand a book to a new data engineer, what wisdom would you add to it? I'm working with O'Reilly Media on a project to collect the 97 things that every data engineer should know, and I need your help. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/97things to add your voice and share your hard-earned expertise. When you're ready to build your next pipeline or want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, a 40 gigabit public network, fast object storage, and a brand new managed Kubernetes platform, you get everything you need to run a fast, reliable, and bulletproof data platform. And for your machine learning workloads, they've got dedicated CPU and GPU instances. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode, that's Linode today to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. You listen to this show because you love working with data and want to keep your skills up to date. Machine learning is finding its way into every aspect of the data landscape. And Springboard has partnered with us to help you take the next step in your career by offering a scholarship to their Machine Learning Engineering Career Track program. In this online, project-based course, every student is paired with a machine learning expert who provides unlimited one-to-one mentorship support throughout the program via video conferences. You'll build up your portfolio of machine learning projects and gain hands-on experience in writing machine learning algorithms, deploying models into production, and managing the lifecycle of a deep learning prototype. Springboard offers a job guarantee, meaning that you don't have to pay for the program until you get a job in the space. The Data Engineering Podcast is exclusively offering listeners 20 scholarships of $500 to eligible applicants. It only takes 10 minutes and there's no obligation. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/springboard today and apply. Make sure to use the code AISpringboard when you enroll. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Ole Dallerup about Dreamdata, a platform for simplifying data integration for B2B companies. So Ole, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Tobias, for having me. My name is Ole, the CTO and co-founder of Dreamdata. We built a platform to help B2B companies gather all their data from marketing, sales, and growth products into one platform so they can get a unified view of how they're acquiring customers and how they're acquiring the customers who's paying the most.
And do you remember how you first got involved in the area of data management?
Sure. I thought a little bit about that. And actually, I think it was while I was studying. I was studying computer science and a lot of my friends, they were playing poker online, and I also caught that. And we ended up being pretty good at it. But one of the tools we used was a tool called Poker Tracker that was kind of tracking all our online gambling and tracking our opponents. And every day after I kind of gambled all night, I would kind of get up in the morning and look at data. How did I play? How did I kind of act on certain situations? And sometimes, of course, I acted very poorly, and sometimes hopefully also good. And then I would kind of use the data to improve my skills.
And so now you're building the Dreamdata Platform to simplify the overall integration and visibility of data across the different touch points in B2B companies. I'm wondering if you can describe a bit more about what it is that you're building there and some of the ways that it's being used by your customers.
Yes, so some of the things we experienced was that, so we come from a company, or we kind of, a couple of years back, two of the founders, we came from a company called Trustpilot. And one of the problems we had was we were driving a lot of traffic to sign up for our customers. And it was difficult for us to kind of put any kind of number on what those kind of signups. And it was often free signups, like a free business product signups. And it was hard for us to put any real value on it. When we asked sales, they described this as being really zero value. And then we went to marketing, and marketing had a similar experience. They were like buying expensive leads from like Google ads and Facebook ads and so on. And they couldn't either kind of justify always all their spend. And we found that would be like, that was a strange thing for us, because we were used to working with like tech products. We were used to tracking all user activity. We knew what all our customers were doing, how they kind of came in to the product the first time, how often they used it, what functionalities they use. So we had all that kind of insight. And so we found it strange that we couldn't also have that same insight from the sales and acquisition point of view. And that's how kind of things started. We started building this out, saying, okay, so now let's kind of start tracking all the users, understanding where they are. Let's look at all the different systems. We have kind of commercial systems where we have users' activities in, which is, I mean, at Trustpilot with stuff like Zendesk for support tickets, Salesforce for sales activity, marketing, we're using HubSpot, and we probably had 3 or 4 other systems where we had a fraction of the journey in. And then additionally came normal web tracking. But as a kind of a company grows, you suddenly end up having a lot of different websites with different landing pages and all kinds of stuff where you have to track the users. And that ended up being relatively complex. And that's when we decided also to start the company. And that's really the problem we still solve. We pull in data from a lot of different sources. We join it together so that you have one uniform way, kind of view of what the customers are doing, how they're interacting with your product. Customers, when I say customers, it often means customers or prospects. But we kind of can map up a journey, and then we can apply more interesting analytics on it, which is often something about like trying to understand all these touch points at a more aggregated level and understanding what of those touch points are actually driving your revenue. Is it how you acquired the customer, like the first touch, which is sometimes interesting in a marketing perspective, but there's a lot of kind of things happening in most companies, and most of our customers, they have a very long sales journey. So from they kind of see the customer the first time until they are kind of able to close a deal with them, it's not uncommon that it takes 6 months.
So the company was born out of the frustration of trying to gain visibility about all of the different interactions of customers and how that fed into the overall success of the business that you are in. But what is it that's keeping you motivated as you continue to build out and grow the capabilities in Dreamdata?
I think partly actually giving that visibility. I think a lot of companies, they don't have a good picture of like how things are going, and then they don't have that visibility of the details of how they are helping customers, what are the customers doing, how are you acquiring customers. And that might, for some companies, that's not necessarily kind of at the beginning a problem, because what they find a sales channel, and they succeed in that, and they kind of repeat that logic and try to do that again and again. But as soon as something comes into the market that changes the profitability of that channel, then they get into problem. And I think you're seeing that, or we're at least seeing that with more and more companies, that they used to go, for example, Google Ads. That used to be very like a good business. They would just acquire customers that way. But then the price started increasing. And initially for a lot of companies, and particularly in B2B, that wasn't necessarily the biggest problem, because they could actually pay a lot for customers. Often the contracts here are like from $10,000 up to several $100,000 per year. So like whether they paid $100 or maybe $500 to acquire a customer, that didn't matter. But suddenly it stopped working, or they couldn't buy the demand because now the price was not like $500, it was several $1,000s. And so they started going out to other channels, Facebook. And funny enough, you see a lot of B2B companies actually advertise on Facebook, and some also manage to get it to work, but that's a different topic. They go out on other channels, and now the complexity becomes much larger, because now you're not just looking at one channel, you actually need to combine a lot of different sources. You might also be aggressive on emails, and so I think that's a large portion of it. And then one thing that is for me important is also silos. I don't like that. I find it problematic when companies put themselves in silos. Often you see marketing sit in one silo, and they are tasked with get more leads to sales, just get more leads. No matter what, just get more leads. And then sales sit in their kind of silo, and they're tasked with getting revenue. And the management is just telling them, hey, sales, get more revenue. And then it doesn't take very long before sales tell marketing, hey, we are not getting revenue because you are coming with poor leads. And I think that's, a relatively poor way of communicating, because it doesn't help much. They have to work together. Marketing are good at certain things. Sales are good at other things. And they need to work together on driving revenue. and that's important. And if you are like a SaaS product maybe and doing free products, then I think the product department also needs to fit into that game. They are responsible for driving revenue, not responsible for giving away a product.
And there are a number of people who might be familiar with the B2C or businesses that are selling to consumers directly, but what are some of the ways that the experience of those organizations differ from the B2B or businesses that are selling directly to other businesses, and how does that impact the overall complexity and capability of gaining a useful overview of the customer lifecycle?
So often with B2C, you have more data, which of course has certain challenges of like scale. Today, that's of course relatively easier than it used to be. But the good side about a lot of data is you can often do statistical models. And so that's very interesting. And you'll see large companies, they've been doing this for a very long time. I think the use case I've always heard about is that McDonald's could predict their sales by looking at the weather, which is probably true to a large extent. And so if you have these enormous amounts of data and history, then you can actually predict a lot of things with just like, it's not basic statistics, but statistics at least. When you move into the B2B world, it's often a case where you don't have enough data to do at least this kind of statistics. And then you need to look a little bit more into the data. And every detail you can get matters. The good part is then also there's fewer people, so you can actually start recording at a higher level of detail. Who did you talk with? And so on, which how often happens in the CRM systems. So that's one of the advantages. And then there are a lot of small details, like if you are a B2B company and are doing tracking, well, then you can do a reverse lookup of the IP addresses and then start understanding a little bit of like who was actually visiting my website without understanding necessarily, like without having anyone signing up, giving their email address. You can actually start guessing about which company it is. So there's a few differences. And then from a tracking point of view, the biggest difference is in the B2C world, you track the user, and the user is also the one buying. In the B2B world, you track a company, and there's a lot of users involved in actually making the deal. And the person buying at the end is usually not the decision maker. At least to my experience, when I was running at least a large technology operations, then I was often an important decision maker, but I was rarely the person that had the credit card. That was our assistant. So yeah, in that manner.
And you mentioned too that there are often silos that occur between some of the different responsibilities of people who are interacting with the customers at different points in the interaction cycle. And I'm wondering what you have found to be some of the contributing factors that give rise to those different silos and the challenges that poses in terms of being able to effectively map the journey of the customer through all those different interaction points to the point where they're actually paying you money.
Yes. So I think I'll start here by talking a little bit about like where I come from, because my background is engineering. And when I started engineering, software engineering, I was often told what to do by business people. And I got to learn that that's not always a good way of doing. And I think most kind of companies that today, they're working in cross-functional teams, engineering teams. They are very kind of work side by side with the product managers and the designers, and they together are responsible for delivering a product. That is important because the engineers know which technologies can actually make a difference, but the product managers are also the ones, and the designers having a good understanding of the users and the customers, and that way we can build the greatest products. For me, this is a little bit the same in the field we're working at right now. Marketing and sales in poor companies, they are silos and they blame each other. I think that also happens in the poor, and that for sure happened in the old days, in like product management or program management, we called it that at that time, right? And engineering, they blamed each other and worked in silos, but they found a way to work together. I think we need to see marketing and sales do the same. But to do that, they need a way of measuring the results in the same way. So that right now, sales are often measured by like bookings or like how much sales they do, which makes sense. Marketing needs to be the same. But now we need to share the revenue. And that's where Dreamdata comes in. We need to, we work with companies and help them try to find a way where they can actually do some kind of sharing, and so they can easily work together. So the marketing are not only responsible for getting more leads, but they're responsible for getting more revenue because that's what matters. And so quantity is not necessarily a good thing here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned too that because of these different responsibilities, they might be tracking the information in different systems. And so I'm wondering what you have found to be some of the common sets of information that you are tracking for the different roles and the different types of source systems that you're trying to integrate with. And I'm curious how you're approaching the collection and cleaning of that data in order to be able to build useful insights for the businesses that you're working with.
Yeah. And it also took some time to kind of figure that out. What we do is we pull out the data using the APIs of the different systems and store it, at least at the end, inside our data warehouse. We use Google BigQuery as our data warehouse, which is super essential to kind of how we do things. I will add here that I used to use Amazon Redshift a lot. Amazon Redshift would not be able to do what we do, at least not in a decent cost. And then I think Snowflake, I haven't used Snowflake so much, but you could in theory do this in Snowflake, I think. But we pull in the data pretty raw and pretty much as it is. We of course have jobs that then runs and kind of does this asynchronously. And we use a kind of a different set of projects to make this work, depending on what type of data it is. Often when we pull data from these other SaaS tools like Zendesk, Salesforce, and HubSpot, those kind of tools, we use an open source project called Singer.io, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with. And if not, then it's a great ETL tool to check out. It's kind of the open source version of Stitch data. And we use that to pull in some data. And now we have the kind of the raw data. Then we do transformation. So we clean up the data into a uniform model. And that's of course a little bit more sophisticated, but let me the simple version is in all CRM systems, there's a contact. Sometimes they call it different things, but there's a contact. And the contact has an email address, they have a name, they have an ID, they have a creation date, and so on. So we find a couple of fields that we kind of need, and we pull that out. And so we pull it into a uniform way. The same we do with companies or accounts and activity data and so on, which is also, depending on what the system is, we kind of pipe it into either activity data, contacts, or companies. That's kind of the primary kind of objects we have. Additionally, we need to get our revenue, which is probably the problem we haven't 100% solved yet. So here we actually often have a custom script per customer that ensures that we take the revenue in the right way. Unfortunately, most systems that contains either bookings or revenue are different. They structure the data in different forms or customized per customer, which is not always ideal for us. We're getting closer, but we're not there fully. And then we crunch the data. So we build up data models, crunch the data, and we use a tool called Dataform. People that might be familiar with dbt, but Dataform is kind of a competitor to that. And if you like BigQuery a lot, then in particular, it's very interesting, but they support Snowflake and Redshift and probably also other databases as well. But they can really help you build data models and build up the dependency graph so that when you run your data model, then instead of running kind of doing a lot of schedules where they all depend on each other, then you just build up the graph and they ensure that models are run in the right order, which makes at least that job relatively easy. And then additionally, we pull in a lot of tracking data. So we build our own kind of tracking pipeline. People are maybe familiar with a company called segment.com, which does customer data infrastructure. And I'm a huge fan of them. And we have an integration to them so we can get the data in like that if customers are using Segment. Unfortunately, not enough customers are using Segment. So we build our own and used their open source, the Analytics.js, to kind of build our own pipeline where we're piping in the data. We're using a lot of Google Cloud data flow, and data flow is also, it's an Apache project called, I think it's called Apache Beam. which is also a very interesting tool to kind of stream data in, do some kind of transformation, and then stream it down into whatever store you have, which for us is then often BigQuery, but could be as such anything else. And they're very interesting with this comparing. Like, I mean, it's a product that is very close to tools like Spark, but the difference between them is often that it auto scales out of the box. So it's very easy to have a lot of data coming in, and so therefore you can actually stream the data live into, for example, BigQuery, which is very useful.
And one of the challenges that exist beyond just being able to manage the data as it's coming in is ensuring that there are useful data elements that are being generated in the first place to be able to identify all the different ways that you're interacting with the customers at the different points. And what have you found to be some of the difficulties in working with your customers to ensure that they are using the systems that they say they are, and ensuring that all of their interactions are getting recorded so that they're able to get that effective visibility across the different paths that customers might take?
My general experience in this is that the best way of getting data cleanup project started or successful is by start using the data before it's clean. So many, not all of our customers, definitely not, but a large portion of our customers are coming to us because they actually acknowledge that. In fact, they want to clean up their data, but they also understand to actually do that, they need to start using the data for something. And so they can show people that need to input or actually run the projects to clean up the data or make it kind of consistent. They see a real outcome of doing it. And so in doing that, we help the customers like set up the systems they use, we get it in, and then very often with a few minutes or at least not more than a few hours of work, we can spot the general problems. And for B2B companies, the general problems are typically stuff like you're not recording this, you're not adding UTM parameters on your links, you have a lot of duplicated accounts or contacts. This is something you want to look at. That's typically the problems we see.
And then once you have the data onboarded to your platform, what are some of the approaches that you're using for being able to do something like entity recognition or entity resolution or master data management to be able to determine what are the actual canonical business entities that all these different users and interactions map to, and being able to build that overall visualization for your customers as to what are the useful pieces of information that they're able to take some sort of action on?
Yes, so that's a good question. I mean, so first we have now all the data in. And so from our perspective, we start with the contact and we find all the contacts. And a contact for us is typically an email address, but it could also in theory be a phone number. That's actually the ID for us. And that's another benefit of being in the B2B world versus the B2C. In the B2C, you will always say, hey, the user could change their email address. But in the B2B world, if you change your email address, it typically means you changed your job, which is actually often a final indication of this is another person now. Like technically, of course, it's not another person, but from a tracking point of view, it's a good way of doing it. And then we find that person in all the systems where that contact is present. We find all the activity for each of these kind of systems. And so that's typically pretty straightforward because most of these systems are built so that they try to keep a good relation between the activity. For example, a send this ticket, that's typically very easy to link to who actually who's the customer. And that makes sense, right? Because else you can't reply back to the customer. So often you have that information. And then the more hard part when we talk ID resolution is typically tracking data. And to track the users, we set a cookie. And so we can track kind of users. Then when they identify themselves, which is typically they sign up to a form, they log into a product or similar, we associate the user's email address with that cookie. And so now we can see also kind of for the past, what has that user done? And that we kind of build up together. So now we have activities on users being email addresses. The next step is to figure out which company does this user belong to. And so the first place we look is in the CRM system, which is typically the record of truth, at least for most companies, of kind of the relation between a user and a company. that's great. We sometimes we can find the user there. Sometimes we can't see the user there. Then we take the next step, and then we take and see if the user is having an email address that's actually a business email. Let's say it's a business email, then we'll try to take that email or that website and try to find the company with that website. If we succeed in that, great, we've succeeded, and now we kind of fluffy linked the user with to that company. And then the last resolution is that we do reverse lookup of the IP address. So the user had some activities on the website, and it's either the user is signed up with a Gmail account, so we can't kind of associate it with a company, or we don't have an email address, so we simply don't know who the user is. And we can reverse look up the IP address and then get a website again, and then try to fuzzy link the user activity with a website. And then third, sometimes if our customers are using enrichment tools, which could be Clearbit, for example, then we can sometimes do this a little bit better. I mean, Clearbit would sometimes be able to look up an email address and then actually put it on a specific company with a maybe higher accuracy than us.
And you mentioned that you're using Singer for a lot of the data ingestion, or optionally using something like Segment. I'm wondering what you have found to be some of the challenges in terms of being able to map to a useful lowest common denominator data model, and the ways that you're approaching either dropping data or removing data that doesn't map to that model, or being able to maintain extra information when it's available so that you can optionally expose that to the end user who's trying to do deeper research on the data sets that you've compiled for them.
This can be very difficult sometimes. I think the biggest challenge sometimes is that, not sometimes, it's always the biggest challenge is you have to actually understand that system pretty well to do this. So if you don't know Salesforce, it's pretty hard to do the mapping, even looking at the data, because there's always kind of strange things happening. So when you go into a system you don't know, then there's a couple of things that are usually easy, like contacts and companies. That's usually easy. There's a name field, there's an email field, there's a creative field. You usually will figure that out. But when you start looking at activity data, it always becomes more complicated. And often the systems are also exposing that data in a less natural way, and they are more unique. I think the first thing is, and what I always kind of recommend people to do is, if they work at a company and they actually need to analyze, let's say, Salesforce data, then start by getting a login to Salesforce so you can browse around and see the data in kind of the view that the salespeople or marketing people are looking at it. That helps a lot. That makes it a lot easier. And that's also what we do often. If we need to integrate to a new system that we don't necessarily know, then often we would ask the customers, can we get access, like view access or whatever? It just helps us a lot to see the data from that perspective when we build the integrations.
And what does the onboarding process look like for customers who are starting to use your system, and the overall process for being able to integrate with their data sources and ensure that you're collecting all of the necessary information for the different ways that they're interacting with customers?
So the first thing we do is we set up, of course, their account, but the first thing we ask them to do is add the tracking script on their website. And the reason for this is quite simple. Most companies, and I find this scary actually, but it is unfortunately very true. Most companies actually don't have very good tracking on their website. When you call most companies, then you figure out that the tracking they have on their website is Google Analytics. And where Google Analytics is a great tool for kind of looking at some basic web traffic, you can't get the data out. And it's not at any fine-grained level on who was actually doing the activities. It's aggregated data, which makes it like a really poor tool to store all really, for me, crucial business information. So that's the first thing we always ask customers to do. And also before we start like deep conversations around how the data look. Then often we will, it depends a little bit on like whether the customers are more or less technical, but if they are more technical, we'll just ask them to connect to all the tools, which is just logging into our product and then typically just doing authentication with whatever service, and then we get a token and so on. and we can start pulling the data. And then we'll set up the syncs. Initial syncs takes sometimes a little bit of time. We just close the customer with, I think, 5 million contacts. That will probably take a few hours to synchronize, and so on. So that's kind of the first thing we do. But very quickly, when we have the data, we set up a call with the customers to try to understand their process. How are you doing sales? What your marketing processes? How early in the funnel? Like, how long? We ask questions like, how long is the sales funnel? Do you expect this to be like very short? Is it very long? And most of our customers, they are like 3, 6, 9 months sales journeys, which means that often you want to look at something that happens earlier. So we try to understand, which they often is often described as marketing qualified leads or sales qualified leads. And you try to understand, okay, how do you map that out? What's the definitions for you? We talk about how's the revenue mapped. If they use standard systems like Salesforce to have this in, you would look at the opportunities. You try to understand like how you're mapping opportunities. What is the amount that actually says there? Are you a subscription business? Are you a transactional business? So we try to understand all those kind of things. We try to get a couple of base numbers in. For example, like how much money did they spend on Google ads last month? How much revenue did they have last month? So on. So that we have a couple of base numbers so that when we get the data in and we have crunched it, we can kind of say just, okay, it's in ballparks at least, or it's the same numbers. And so we did it right. We have all the classical problems as well, right? Doing SQL, you can easily end up duplicating data and so on. So we're of course careful around that.
And then because of the fact that your customers do each have their own specific ways of interacting with their customers and specifics in terms of the data sources that they're trying to use and integrate with, how does that affect your overall approach to building out new features or your product roadmap to ensure that you're going to be able to fulfill the needs of your customers as you bring them on, or the product verticals or the market verticals that you target in terms of trying to gain your own customers to ensure that you'll be able to work with them effectively?
Yeah, I mean, this is always difficult. I think building products is hard sometimes because you have to, you can't act as a consultant, build too customized solutions. On the other hand, you can't generalize so much that it's not useful for the customers who actually have more specific needs. So we kind of work every day to find that balance. If we have to stay with the data side of things, it's actually mostly pretty straightforward. We actually are able to map all the data pretty generic, only applying some configurations. And the only exception is to that is what I mentioned earlier, it's revenue, where we have a small query that kind of normalizes the data per customer. And that's actually the only kind of custom data thing we have per customer. When we talk about the user interface and how we analyze the data, it's all the same. But I think we are challenged sometimes that certain customers want to look at a specific number. We had recently a conversation with one of our customers. We were calculating a number that was kind of supposed to be a return on investment number on your ads, and they were advocating a different number. And those kind of things is always hard conversations. As such, the numbers did represent the same thing. They were using just a slightly different formula. And that's hard sometimes to kind of question. We try in general to go with what's the kind of norm in the market to do. But sometimes we are also entering a new way of looking at data, and then it's a little bit harder. We kind of have to, we try to talk with customers all the time. As often as we can, and try to understand them, and then pick the best solutions across our customers, right? And then sometimes one of our customers are not super happy with that solution, but that's how it has to be.
And in terms of being able to build out reports and visualizations of the information that you're collecting and the analysis that you're providing, what have you found to be some of the useful strategies, and what are the challenges in terms of being able to make sure that those reports are actionable and easy to interpret for your end users?
Talk with your customers. It's unfortunately the best. If you have a product where you can track users and behavior, where you have enough data to kind of look at that, then definitely do that. But what we do is we talk with customers all the time, try to understand what they're trying to do, try to ask them to kind of go through the report and see what they get out of it. That gives us a lot of insights. Then we can often correct the dashboards.
In terms of your experience of using Dreamdata for your own business and being able to map the journeys of your customers, how has that influenced the overall direction or product roadmap for the business that you're building?
So far, not so much. I think our head of sales is kind of pushing a lot to to do changes here. I think he has a lot of things that he would like to see in the product that is helpful for him. We're a little bit careful about that because partly we're of course trying to solve our own needs, but I think mostly we're trying to solve our customers' needs. And so far we are careful, but we use our own product a lot. So there's, I think, primarily a couple of functionalities we use a lot. So we are building a customer journey tool, and if at least for those who listen carefully, I mean, we have a really good mapping of all the companies who's been on our website, and so we can actually see who's been on our website, like both people that are anonymous, but also companies that has been identified themselves. And that's very interesting sometimes, that when we had a sales conversation with a company maybe a few months ago, and maybe we stopped the conversation, they were not ready to buy, they were not interested, whatnot. There's many reasons not to buy. But then when you see that they come back to a website and they have a couple of visits, then it's maybe time to kind of call them again. So that's one of the ways we use it. And then we of course use it to kind of keep track of our paid and ensure that we don't overspend compared to how much we make.
And what are some of the most interesting or surprising insights that you've been able to gain as a result of being able to view the data and the analytics that you're compiling, either for yourself or when working with some of your customers?
So the insights are many and very detailed. Let me kind of come with an example. So we found a customer, and we saw that if we split their groups of customers into two buckets, those who had more than one session before they first sign up, and those who had only one session before they signed up, or like they signed up in the first session on their website. Then we found for that customer that the first bucket, those who had more than one session before they signed up, they were 5 times more likely to actually end up as customers. So that's a type of data we see. Often we can help customers really understand like what are their paid medias actually work. Like they do a lot of advertisements, spending several $100,000 a month on showing ads, but like are some of these ads not really bringing any money back? The truth for most companies is also that their ads is very useful and they are very important, but just a percentage of that they could just close down without losing any revenue. And then we help in particular companies understanding what content pieces are driving revenue. One company we helped understand, so they were doing some partnerships with another competitor, but more like a company related to kind of what they did. And they wrote a couple of articles together, but as such, they were actually writing the articles more to have the partnerships, which also helped them in other cases. But it turned out that those articles were actually driving a lot of revenue. And they were driving so much revenue, they could actually pay for their content team. And so that company, we kind of talk with them and try to get them to do more of this, and help them to realize that actually maybe this is the type of content you need to produce more of. Where they had other content pieces that were driving a lot of traffic, and in that sense, they looked good. But when they looked at how much revenue they got out of it, they didn't make any money. And so this is often what we see in the B2B world, that there's of course correlation between traffic and revenue, but there are maybe other things that impacts your revenue more than traffic. And it's interesting to try to find those pieces, and we can help with that.
And in terms of your experience of building and growing both the technical and business elements of Dreamdata, what have you found to be some of the most challenging or interesting or unexpected lessons that you've learned?
I think it is always hard to grow and build a team. And I think maybe in Dreamdata, I haven't had on building the team, doing that. I think I haven't learned my lessons are probably more from the past. And definitely here, I mean, for me, I'm an advocate of like hire people you trust. And if you don't trust people, then I mean, let them go. Like then that's not good. If you don't trust them anymore, then you shouldn't kind of have them on your team. Whether that's fair or not fair, that's like unfortunately that's how it is. But if you have a team you trust, you can also give them a lot of responsibility and get them to fix things, and that just like builds a good culture. When we talk at Dreamdata, I think some of my biggest challenges was the commercial side of things. I had definitely had to learn to go into sales conversations and have like sales conversations, avoiding to talk too technical, find that right balance between talking code and talking like more about the value and of the product and so. And I think I'm partly still struggling on that, and partly I'm also struggling on like finding it enjoyable. I do enjoy building data and writing code a lot, and I mean sometimes other parts of the job dictates that I has to be other places, which is sometimes hard for me.
And one of the pieces that you were mentioning before too about the content being one of the strongest drivers of revenue in a particular case, I'm wondering how the overall evolution of the marketing landscape and different types of media or content distribution, how that impacts your overall approach to building out your platform, as well as some of the ways that you're approaching trying to grow your own business, or what you found to be some of the most useful mediums or channels for being able to grow revenue or grow the audience.
So I think that's very specific to companies on like what works well here. I think we do see a lot of companies where I would generally say in the B2B world, most companies are trying to produce their content on their own website. Sometimes it's of course a good idea for like search engine optimizations and so to have content elsewhere, but like generally that is I think the consensus right now. I would also say right now, I think the consensus is that you want to own your own stuff. So this like getting the content out on a lot of other platforms is not something we're seeing crazy lot amount of companies doing. So far it's not really impacting us, but it's very different. Like some companies are doing a lot of content and they are betting relatively large amounts that they can write content that will drive traffic and awareness. Other companies are not doing that at all, and they don't even believe that that's a possibility for them. So they come of all types, but I can talk about like ourselves. So like we're doing ads as probably most companies are doing. When we do Google ads, we get relevant traffic in, but not super relevant. When we do Facebook traffic, I would say we are more or less like we are targeting some of the customers, like retargeting people, and that works. But if we are like looking at like acquiring new customers, I don't think Facebook works particularly well for us. We should like now we're still early, and so we don't have that much data to kind of conclude yet. But if I had to conclude right now, I would definitely close it down. But what works well for us is Capterra, which is a review platform for software. That works well for us. We see a lot of SaaS companies also use G2 Crowd, or G2, I think they're just called now, which the data we have seems also that it works quite well. So if you're in that space, I would definitely look towards that if you can do something. Yeah, and then I think also podcasts and webinars has worked pretty well for us to get some awareness. For us, it also worked really well with content. We managed to produce some content that actually drew relatively a large amount of traffic for us, at least.
And are there any other areas of the work that you're doing at Dreamdata or the overall space of B2B sales and revenue tracking, or any of the other challenges that you're facing in the data landscape that we didn't discuss that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I think we didn't talk a lot about machine learning and like those kind of things. And to be honest, we don't do a lot about that right now. We'll start investing in that pretty heavily. And so we look a lot at like stuff like macro chain and see if we can use that for attribution algorithms and so on, which is very interesting. I think always when kind of doing this, I'm always concerned about like the amount of data it's required to actually get some valid out of it. But I do like look forward to we can actually get some time play with that.
Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you or follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as a final question, I would just like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
I think actually it is actually it's very annoying I have to say this, but I think also, unfortunately it's not necessarily what Dreamdata does, but it's part of it at least. I lack a place where I can get all my data in and actually have it available so that both me and my analyst team and so on can actually query the data and get something out of it without having to ask a lot of people for help. I think everyone that works in large organizations, they've felt that pain that to get data over here, they have to go to some person and get it out. Well-structured data lakes, I think, is that's what I require. And I'm arguing that we built that at Dreamdata, at least for the commercial and revenue operations side of things. But in general, I would like that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and discuss the work that you're doing at Dreamdata. It's definitely a very interesting business and an interesting problem domain that you're working in. So I'm excited to see where it goes for you. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.